I want you to picture something. You're in a hospital room. Could be you, could be, a family member. And you see that monitor in the corner, that black screen with the bright green line just dancing across. Beep, 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 beep. It's kind of comforting, right?
It is. It implies that as long as it's beeping, the machine knows what's going on.
Or at least that someone knows what the machine is saying.
That's the real assumption, isn't it?
Exactly. We trust that squiggly line. We trust that this technology, which Willem Einthoven invented, all the way back in 1901, that it's foolproof. And we assume the person in the scrubs standing next to the bed can read that line like it's their native language.
But what if that assumption is, well, what if it's wrong?
That is the terrifying question we are tackling today. We have a stack of research here that really peels back the curtain on cardiac monitoring. We're looking at studies on nurse competence that, I have to be honest, made me sweat a little.
And we're looking at a workforce crisis that is just draining the collective brain power out of our hospitals.
And then, maybe, just maybe, we're looking at an AI that might be the only thing that can save us from ourselves.
It really is a perfect storm. You've got this century-old diagnostic tool, the 12-lead EKG, that is, notoriously difficult to master.
Right.
And then you have a new generation of clinicians who just haven't had the reps, the time to master it. And, of course, a legal system just waiting to pounce if they write the wrong thing down.
So let's start with the skill itself, because I think most of us, we just assume that if you're a nurse or a doctor, you learn EKG in school, you take a test, and that's it. You know it forever.
I wish. It's not like riding a bike. It's much more like learning a language that you have to speak every single day, or you just start to forget the vocabulary, and the vocabulary of the heart is incredibly subtle.
You shared a thread from a nursing forum, All Nurses, that really drove this home for me. It wasn't a formal study, just real people talking. The title of the thread was, "Is it really necessary to learn to read an EKG?"
Which is, it's a frightening question to see asked by a professional, isn't it?
It is. I mean, you'd hope the answer is just a resounding yes from everyone.
And mostly it was, but if you read between the lines, underneath all the yeses, there was this real anxiety. You had nurses admitting that they rely heavily on the machine's automated printout.
Which is often wrong, right?
Often wrong. Or they just wait for the doctor to catch things later. There's a real fear of the 12 lead.
And that fear, it seems totally justified when you look at the hard data.
Yeah.
You brought in this study by Andrea Efree about nurse practitioners. Now, these are advanced providers. They can prescribe, they diagnose. How did they do?
This study was, well, it was sobering. The researcher was looking at what they called the confidence-competence gap. So basically, how good do you think you are versus how good are you actually?
And I feel like in most professions, we all probably think we're a little better than we are.
Usually, yes. But here, the MPs, they rated their confidence in identifying acute changes, like a heart attack in progress, at about 57%. So they weren't arrogant. They knew they were a little shaky.
Okay, so 57% isn't amazing, but at least there's self-awareness there.
Yeah.
But then they actually took the test.
And then they took the competence test. And the average score for correctly interpreting the ECGs was 35%.
Hold on. Let's sit with that for a second. 35%. That's failing. That's a huge F-.
It means that, statistically speaking, in this study group, the provider was more likely to miss the diagnosis than to catch it.
That's terrifying. If I'm the patient, those are not the odds I signed up for. What specifically were they getting wrong?
The biggest stumbling block, the thing that tripped almost everyone up, was something called a left bundle branch block.
I keep seeing this term in the notes. Can you describe this for us? What does that even look like on the monitor?
Okay, so imagine the normal heartbeat, that sharp, narrow spike, that's your lub tub. In a bundle branch block, the electrical signal hits a sort of traffic jam. So instead of a nice sharp spike, you get this wide, jagged, really ugly-looking tracing.
Ugly.
And to the untrained eye, and frankly, even to a semi-trained eye, it looks almost identical to the tombstone pattern of a massive heart attack.
So it looks like death, but it might just be a traffic jam in the heart's wiring.
Exactly. It's serious, but it's not necessarily an acute, call the cath lab right now kind of emergency. But in the study, only 18% of the participants could actually tell the difference.
18%. So more than 4 out of 5 looked at that and either thought it was okay or thought it was a heart attack, but they couldn't correctly identify it for what it was.
Right. And, this isn't to bash nurse practitioners. This is to highlight that EKG interpretation is a really high-level expert skill. It takes years and years of looking at thousands of these squiggly lines to spot the difference between ugly but okay and ugly and lethal.
but surely the people at the front door, right, the triage nurses.
Mm.
You walk into the ER, you're clutching your chest. They're the first line of defense. You had a study on them, too.
I did. This is the Sibelius study. And the results here were different, but also very revealing about, human psychology. The triage nurses had very high sensitivity.
Okay, break that down for me. Sensitivity is.
Think of sensitivity like a smoke alarm. You want your smoke alarm to go off every single time there's smoke, even if it's just you burning toast.
You don't want it to miss a real fire.
You never want it to stay silent during a fire. So high sensitivity means these nurses almost never missed a bad EKG. If the patient was having a heart attack, they flagged it.
Okay, that's the good news.
Yeah.
I'd definitely rather they be paranoid than dismissive.
Me too. But the flip side is specificity. Specificity is the ability of the smoke alarm to say, hey, this is just burnt toast, not a 5-alarm fire. Their specificity was only 43.5%.
So the alarm is going off constantly.
Constantly. They were flagging a lot of things as abnormal that turned out to be totally fine. And in an ER, that's better than the alternative, but it creates its own kind of chaos.
Right. Doctors chasing false alarms, resources getting used up.
And patients getting terrified for no reason because the triage nurse couldn't confidently say, no, this is actually normal.
So we've got NPs struggling to diagnose and triage nurses who are basically playing it safe because they aren't sure. It paints a picture of a workforce that's trying their best but is fundamentally unsure of what they're seeing. Why? Why is this happening now?
And this brings us to what people are calling the silver tsunami.
I have to be honest, that term, it sounds like a buzzword you'd hear at a corporate retreat. Is it actually affecting care right this minute, or is this a future projection?
Oh, it's happening right now. And the numbers from the cardiovascular nursing workforce report they're stark. The median age of a registered nurse in the United States is 52.
Median, so half the workforce is older than 52.
Correct, and 47% of the entire nursing workforce is over the age of 50.
That is so much older than I would have pictured. I imagine nurses as these young, energetic grads running around in scrubs.
That's the TV version. The reality is an aging workforce that is, frankly, exhausted. And we are staring down the barrel of a mass retirement event. Over the next decade, we're on track to lose millions of years of cumulative hands-on experience.
And that has to connect back to that competence gap, right?
It's the direct cause. Remember that left bundle branch block we talked about?
Yeah.
You don't really learn to spot that in a textbook. You learn it because a mentor, that nurse with 20 years of experience, pulls you over to the monitor and says, see that little notch right there? That means it's a block, not a STEMI.
And if that mentor retires or just quits,
then there is no one there to pull you over. The report describes this really vicious cycle. You have a shortage of nurses because of retirement. That shortage forces the remaining nurses to work harder, take on more patients.
which leads to burnout.
Exactly. Burnout, especially after the trauma from COVID-19. And that burnout leads to even more turnover. The most experienced people leave, and the new grads are left to basically figure it out on their own.
That's a really depressing feedback loop. The brain drain is causing a skill drain.
It is. And when you have a tired, overworked, inexperienced nurse, you don't just get misdiagnoses, you get legal trouble.
Okay, let's talk about that. Because you included a report on defensive documentation. It feels like a bit of a topic shift, but I suspect it's actually a symptom of the same disease.
It is absolutely a symptom. When you're rushing because you're short-staffed or when you aren't confident in what you're seeing on that EKG, how you document it matters immensely. The report notes that allegations of documentation errors, they account for over 9% of all paid claims against nurses.
9% seems really high for just, paperwork errors.
Because it's not just paperwork, it's the legal story of the patient's care. The biggest trap the report mentions is the copy and paste function in the electronic health record.
Oh, we've all done it. Ctrl-C, Ctrl-L-V. It's a lifesaver.
Well, sure. If you're writing a marketing email, it's fine. If you are documenting a patient's heart rhythm, it is so dangerous. Imagine you're a nurse. It's the end of a 12-hour shift. You are exhausted. At 8 a.m., you write a detailed note. Patient in sinus rhythm, no chest pain. At 2 p.m., you're completely swamped, so you just copy that 8:00 a.m. note and paste it in to save time.
But maybe at 2:00 p.m., the patient wasn't in sinus rhythm.
Exactly. What if the patient has an event at 2:15? When the lawyers look at your chart, you have documented that you assessed the patient and found them stable. When the monitor strip proves they weren't, you have just documented your own negligence.
Wow. It creates a contradiction that you just can't defend in court.
Impossible to defend.
The other thing that stood out to me was the late entry rule. The report made this sound incredibly serious, almost like you're tampering with evidence.
Because it can look that way to a jury. Electronic records are time-stamped down to the second. So if you forget to chart something during the chaos of, say, a code blue, and you go back 6 hours later and try to just type it in as if it happened then, the computer knows.
The computer always knows.
It always knows. And if you don't clearly flag it as a late entry, it looks like you are rewriting history to cover your tracks. It just destroys your credibility. And again, this all links back to the workforce. Who makes these kinds of mistakes? Tired nurses. Rushed nurses.
Nurses who don't have that mentor looking over their shoulder.
Exactly.
So, okay, we have painted a fairly bleak picture here. Let me recap before we move on. We have this gold standard technology, the EKG, that creates data many providers really struggle to interpret. We have a silver tsunami of experts retiring, leaving this huge knowledge vacuum. And we have a high-stakes environment where one copy-paste error can ruin your career.
It feels unsustainable. The human element of the system feels like it's breaking down.
But this is where the story pivots. Because while the humans are getting tired, the machines are waking up. You brought in this study on artificial intelligence that, well, honestly, I read it 3 times because I wasn't sure I was understanding the scale of what it was claiming.
The interpretable estimation of risk of heart failure study. Yeah. This is the moment where we stop looking at the past century of cardiology and start looking at the next one.
So explain the setup for us. Usually, to predict if someone's going to get heart failure in the future, we need a lot of information, right?
Right.
Blood pressure, age, smoking history, maybe a 24-hour Holter monitor.
Right. We build a profile. The traditional method for this is called the Cox model. And you can think of the Cox model like a simple checklist. It just asks, are you old? Check. Do you smoke? Check. Is your blood pressure high? Check. It adds up the checks and it gives you a risk score.
Simple enough.
So this study used a machine learning model called XGBoost. And instead of a checklist, they just fed it the raw signal from a single lead ECG. And this is the key. They only gave it 30 seconds of data.
Just 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And only one lead. So not even the full, 12 camera angle view of the heart?
Just one view. Half a minute. That's it.
And what did it find?
It achieved something called a concordance index of 0.83.
Okay, stop there. 0.83. To a layman, that sounds like a B-. Is that actually impressive in this world?
In medical statistics, 0.5 is a coin flip. It means your model is just guessing. A 0.7 is considered a good, usable clinical test. Getting a 0.83 on a prediction of a future event, that is a massive leap. It's like the difference between looking at a blurry Polaroid and watching a high-definition video.
And it beat the checklist. The Cox model.
Oh, handily. And here is the real kicker. It performed just as well as models that use 24 hours of monitoring data. It got the same answer in 30 seconds that usually takes a full day and night of testing to achieve.
That's mind-bending. What is it seeing in those 30 seconds that our eyes are missing?
That's the detective difference. The checklist model only knows what you tell it. The XGBoost model is a detective. It looks at the waveform itself. It noticed these incredibly subtle changes in things like T-wave amplitude. That's the recovery phase of the heartbeat.
Things a human eye might just gloss over.
Things a human eye literally cannot quantify. A nurse might see a T-wave and say, yeah, looks normal. The AI measures the exact slope and curve and says, this specific pattern correlates with heart failure 5 years from now.
But this brings up that classic AI fear, right? The black box. If the computer just spits out heart failure but can't tell us why, no doctor's going to trust it.
That has always been the barrier. But this study used something called SAT values.
SAT values. Sounds like jargon. Translate that for us.
Think of it like a math teacher asking a student to show their work. A black box just gives you the answer. SHAP values show the work. So the AI produces a chart that basically says, I'm predicting a high risk because the T-wave is inverted right here and the QRS complex is slightly wide over there.
So it's actually explaining its logic in medical terms.
Exactly. It validates itself. It builds trust because the doctor can look at the SHAP report and say, oh, I see what it saw. That actually makes sense.
This feels like it could solve that whole competence gap we talked about at the beginning. If the AI can spot the left bundle branch block, or even way subtler things, with 0.83 accuracy, do we even need the human to be the expert anymore?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it? If we can screen every single patient during a routine checkup, just clip a monitor on for 30 seconds while you're taking their blood pressure, we could catch heart failure years before it ever happens. It would shift medicine from being reactive to being truly proactive.
But we aren't there yet. Hospitals don't have this XGBoost model running on their iPads today. So what do we do in the meantime? We still have the silver tsunami. We still have the tired nurses.
We have to bridge the gap. And that brings us to the systemic solutions part of your source stack. Hospitals are starting to realize they can't just hire their way out of this shortage. They have to change the entire model of care.
You mentioned Houston Methodist. What are they doing that's so different?
They're leaning heavily into virtual nursing.
Which sounds like a nurse on Zoom.
It's a bit more sophisticated than that, but
Yeah.
but yeah, essentially. Think back to that experienced nurse who's 60 years old. Her back hurts. She can't lift patients anymore. She's ready to retire.
Right.
Instead of just letting her leave and taking all that knowledge with her, you put her in a command center, a VICU.
A virtual ICU.
Exactly. She sits in front of a bank of monitors. She has cameras in the patient rooms. She can handle the admission paperwork, the discharge instructions, and crucially, she can watch the cardiac monitors.
So she becomes the guardian angel for the new grad who's actually on the floor.
That's a perfect way to put it. The 22-year-old new grad handles the physical tasks, hanging the IVs, changing the dressings. But when a weird rhythm pops up on the screen, they don't have to guess. They call the virtual nurse. The mentor is still there, just through a screen.
That seems like a really smart way to keep that brain power in the system. But there was another solution you mentioned that seemed a bit more, I don't know, controversial. The monitor watcher.
Yes, Tamekia Thomas wrote about this. The idea is simple. You have a dedicated person whose only job is to stare at the EKG screens. They don't have patients, they don't answer phones, they just watch the lines.
That sounds like possibly the most boring job on earth.
It might be boring, but the data argues it's really effective. One study showed that dedicated monitor watchers detected lethal dysrhythmias 95% of the time.
95%. Okay, compare that to the standard model where the busy floor nurse is supposed to be watching in between everything else.
In that standard model, detection dropped to 88%. That 7% gap. I mean, that's real human lives. That's the difference between catching a cardiac arrest immediately and finding the patient unresponsive 10 minutes later.
So why is it controversial? If it works, just do it.
Well, two reasons. One is cost, of course, but the bigger one is alarm fatigue and dependency. If I'm a nurse on the floor and I know someone else is watching that monitor for me, do I stop looking myself?
You get lazy.
You get complacent. And your own skill atrophies even faster. It's like, if the safety net is too good, maybe the trapeze artist stops practicing how to do the catch.
So we're in this really weird transition period. We've got humans who are struggling to keep up with the data. We have these safety nets like monitor watchers and virtual nurses being rigged up to catch the mistakes. And then on the horizon, we have this super AI that sees things we can't even imagine.
We are absolutely moving from the art of medicine to the data science of medicine. For 100 years, reading an EKG was an art form. It relied on the intuition and the experience of the clinician. But as that experience retires, we are replacing it with algorithms and systems.
Which brings me to a thought I just can't shake. If that AI study holds up, if a machine can diagnose heart failure in 30 seconds with better accuracy than a human, what happens to the clinician?
That is the provocative thought, isn't it?
Are we heading toward a future where the doctor or nurse is basically just a translator? You know, the machine gives the diagnosis, the machine writes the treatment plan, and the human is just there to hold your hand and explain what the computer said.
I think we might be. And you have to ask yourself, if the human role becomes strictly about comfort and translation, does that solve the burnout crisis? Or does it end up making the job feel meaningless?
Or does it finally free them up to actually care for the patient instead of just staring at a screen all day?
That's the hope.
A huge thank you for walking us through this both terrifying and fascinating landscape today. I will never look at that little green line the same way again.
Happy to be here.
And thank you, our listener, for diving deep with us. Keep your heart beating, and we'll see you on the next one.